So for what annual rate so since they're talking about compounding this amount daily, that means we're again looking at the formula with n into it. So they're telling us we are starting out with $100. It's growing to $300. We don't know what our rate of interest is. They're telling us it's compounded daily, so that's your n equals 365. And time was 20 years. So a lot of this setup is going to be very similar to the examples we've done before. So we've got $300 as our amount, 100 as our principal. And in parentheses, we have 1 plus r. Of course, r is the unknown value. Daily is 365, that's your n, raised to the exponent of 365 times 1. Okay? So when you're trying to calculate r, our goal again would be to try and isolate that r. So the first thing we want to do is get rid of that 100. So again, we're multiplying that 100 inside our parentheses. So to get rid of that 100, divide both sides by 100. On the right-hand side, we have the parentheses part left behind. What's 365 times 20?
7,300.
Yeah, very good, 7,300. And of course, 300 divided by 100 will leave us behind with the 3. So now here's the thing that we got to worry about. My r is inside the parentheses, and that's the value we're trying to isolate. And not to mention your parentheses has that exponent of 7,300, right? In the past, when we've had problems like this, think about if you had something like x squared equals 4 and I was trying to solve for x, what would we normally do in that case? Yeah, you would take a square root, right? So the inverse of a square is square root. We would take a square root on both sides and basically go about solving our problem. So we have to bring that same idea in here, which means to get rid of the exponent of 7,300, we need to use the 7,300th root, right? So if it's second power, we use the square root. If it's third power, we use the cube root. So when it's 7,300 as our power, we have to use the 7,300th root. But this is what we're going to do instead of actually using a radical symbol. Normally when we have square root of x, we can write it as 1/2. You know, same thing if you had cube root of x, we could write it as 1/3. So using that same idea of using a rational exponent, we're actually going to raise both sides of our equation to 1 over 7,300, which means multiply this exponent here with 1 over 7,300. Okay, so basically you can think of this guy as being 7,300 over 1 being multiplied by its inverse. So these guys actually end up canceling each other out, and that's how we get rid of that exponent on the right hand side, which then cleans up our parentheses because now we don't have that exponent anymore. But obviously now I have this 7,300th root on my 3. Okay, we're going to leave that as it is for now. We're just going to go ahead and get our r by itself and then try and put everything in the calculator at one time. So what's the first thing we want to do to get that r by itself? Subtract the 1. So these guys will cancel out, leaving us behind with r over 365, and then of course 3 to the power of 1 over 7,300 minus 1. Now be careful, the 3 is not by itself anymore, right? It has this exponent on it, so we cannot just subtract 3 minus 1 and get a 2 because that 3 comes with the exponent. So don't do that 3 minus 1. we will need to do the exponent part first and then bring in the subtraction. And then the last thing to get r by itself,
Multiply by 365.
yeah, multiply both sides by 365. So of course, put this guy in parentheses and multiply it by 365. This cancels out, getting us r by itself. And now you have 365 and then in parentheses 3 to the power of 1/7300 minus 1. Now, if you're trying to type this whole thing in your calculator, I pretty much type it in the way it's written, with the exception of I would put that exponent in parentheses also. So raise it, your 3, and then in parentheses 1 divided by 7300 minus 1, and then close parentheses. Now keep in mind, whenever we have worked with our rate of interest before, what do we do to a percent before we put it in the formula? Yeah, you always convert it to a decimal, right? So anytime we're working with percents, we convert it to decimal. So you're actually going to get the decimal form of the answer here. So to convert it to a percent, you'll need to move your decimal 2 places to the right or multiply by 100. So this guy should end up giving us once you convert it to a percent, round it to 2 decimal places. So what are we expecting to see here as our answer? What do we get when we plug this into our calculator? Leland, you might actually have to do it in a different order. So you may have to start with 3 raised to the power of 1 divided by 7300. Then subtract 1 and then finally multiply 365.
5.4 or 5.5?
We're doing it to 2 decimal places, but yeah, your raw answer is coming out to be something like this. So when we round it to a percent, remember, move your decimal 2 places to the right, and we'll say about 5.49%. If your instructions say 1 decimal, then round it accordingly. But for now, we'll leave it at 2. So honestly, a lot of it is very similar to, how we have done these in the past. The one big change from all the examples we have seen so far is trying to get rid of that exponent 7300. So like I said, raise it to basically its inverse value, which would be 1 over 7300. So you will probably see an example like this in my math lab. So just remember to raise your exponent to 1 over whatever that value is and do it to both sides of your equation. Questions on this guy? Okay, so this was the last thing we have left to talk about in 4.3.